Hello, welcome to Ivy America's Quarantine Edition. Today we're going to be talking about Harry Truman, his policies, and his actions during his presidency. So sit back and enjoy this conversation.
Apps and programs, and I am struggling to get the production quality any better than this. So right now we're just recording this on an iPhone aimed at the slides. We'll walk through it. I'll work on getting something better to you. I'm just working on a bunch of different platforms and nothing is working well right now. So this is what we'll do. We're going to run through Harry Truman. We'll run through his policies and the actions that go through. We've been through most of this, but with last week being kind of crazy, let's just review what we've done and then roll from there. So start off, when we talk about Harry Truman, we've got to understand the late 40s is there's really two different philosophies on how we should be handling the Cold War. And if you talk about what Republicans are looking at, the Republican Party is saying that this should be basically a unilateral action by the United States, that the United States doesn't need to work within an international community. And the Republican Party is hawkish in the sense that they want to go attack the Soviet Union while we have the nuclear bomb advantage, while we have the military advantage. Their argument starts to be that Roosevelt knew that the Soviet Union was going to start doing these things, that Roosevelt capitulated at Yalta, and that Truman was in line with Roosevelt in being too soft. If you look at the Democratic stance, it's going to be we need to be firm, but we need to build some international alliances, and we need to practice containment. So when we talk about Republicans, you have much more aggressive stance towards actions towards the Soviet Union. Democrats, aggressive but not as aggressive and much more about containment. So that got us to the policies of Truman, which we talked about last week. The major one going to be containment. I don't think we need to spend much time on that because that was 6 weeks with Mr. Minnick. We briefly talked about the Truman Doctrine, which was the idea that the United States was going to support any majority facing a revolt against an armed minority. That came out of the Greek Civil War, where we provided aid, and that was also in Turkey, where we provided aid to Turkey to keep the minority Communist Party from overthrowing a majority elected government in Turkey. So those are the two beginning things in 46 and 47. And the Truman Doctrine comes to define Truman's policy throughout his presidency. So that's pretty... All right. And Marshall Plan, we talked about that last week with the idea of providing direct economic aid to Europe. By providing direct economic aid to Europe, you should rebuild the capitalist economy there, creating a strong middle class. Middle class people tend not to be communists, and therefore the Marshall Plan should also act as a containment policy. This slide, you can see the actual way that the money is acting as an actual piece of containment as it surrounds Eastern Europe. Hey, say hi to my wife. Hey, wife.
Hello.
So back to this wonderful lecture here. Marshall Plan is providing economic aid to Europe, which is making sure the Soviet Union can't expand. Berlin airlifts, we mentioned last week, is another great example of Truman and his containment policy and really pushing to make sure that the Soviet Union doesn't gain any type of land anywhere, and so much so that we're going to fight over a half of a city. We talked about how we needed to get supplies into West Berlin because West Berlin is inside of East Germany, the Soviet-controlled portion of Germany. West Berlin is going to be cut off from us with the idea that East Berlin and East Germany will take over all of Berlin, making it a Soviet stronghold. The United States is going to step in to make sure that does not happen. So again, this Berlin airlifts is another great example of containment policy and Truman's resolve to make sure that the Soviet Union cannot expand anywhere into Europe. Yeah, you can read this slide on your own, right? The risks that we're willing to take is World War III for a half city, and showing the United States resolve. It's also showing how strong Stalin is at probing this, or at least in my theory, or at least my analysis is probing to see if the United States is really going to uphold its containment policy. Last week we briefly mentioned NATO being a strong piece of the containment policy in Europe. If you go back to this slide right here, these are all going to be NATO countries also. So not only are they economically allied with us, but they're also going to be military allied with us. And so while the Marshall Plan is the economic piece of containment, NATO is going to be the military piece of containment, basically saying that if one of us is attacked, we're all attacked, and really going to act as a hold on the Soviet Union in Europe. What we did last week is we also mentioned that we're going to develop a NATO for Latin America. And we focused on this idea down here that it's the Organization of American States, which becomes the military alliance for all the countries in the Americas. The United States has now solidified military alliances with everyone in Europe, and now has solidified military alliances with everyone in the Americas. Sorry, I misspoke there. Not everyone in Europe, everyone in West Europe, and every single country in the Americas. You can see some of these countries are even willing to ban communism and break relationships with the Soviet Union. I think what's happening for Latin America is they thought they were going to get a Marshall Plan, and that's not what I wanted that to do. But I think most of those countries thought they were going to get a Marshall Plan out of this, and they did not. We mentioned in one of the classes last week, we started to talk about China. We're going to lose China to the communist revolution, and China is going to be taken over by Mao Zedong. If you just click on this little thing there, that gets us to this. There's not much to say about China. We don't support Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalist government in China, which allows them to fall. The argument is that supporting Chiang Kai-shek is not within the Truman Doctrine because Chiang is no longer popular, and therefore supporting him is a futile attempt. China falls. The problem with China falling is the public outrage against Truman. And I think that's the key takeaway from China. I mean, aside from China becoming communist and 1 billion people under his communist dictatorship, the big thing for American presidents is don't let a country fall, because if a country falls, you will be blamed for it. And Truman is going to have a hard time rebounding from this at all. It's also going to create a two-Chinese system where the United States is only going to recognize Taiwan as being the real China. Well, China thinks that it's the real China. That's going to play through the 1970s. It's going to cause some problems as we move on. But that's really what's coming out of here is the results for an American president are everybody loves Democrats, everybody loves Democrats. Oh my goodness, the Democrats have been kicked out of office. Everybody loves Democrats, everybody loves Democrats, the Democrats get kicked out of office. And so it becomes somewhat problematic. It becomes very problematic for Democrats that if you lose a country, you will be blamed for it. That gets us to our new topic today. I want to run through this relatively quickly because I think most of you remember this from Minnick's class. That's going to be the Korean War. Quick background on Korea. Korea has been divided into two countries. In the north, it's going to be ruled by a communist dictator, Kim Il-sung. This division's happened because the Soviet Red Army has made it this far into Korea and has placed him in charge. In South Korea, it's going to be Syngman Rhee, who is nominally elected. There's some arguments that he's just as much of a dictator as Kim Il-sung, but at least he talks about democracy and he likes capitalism, so we like him. What happens is Kim has been trying to unify Korea because there's really no such thing as North Korea and South Korea. There's always just been one Korea. But post-World War II, so for 5 years we've had a North and a South, and Kim has been wanting to unify Korea as a communist country altogether. Oddly, we're making a speech, a guy named Dean Ashton, the Secretary of State, is making a speech where he lists all our Pacific allies, and he doesn't name South Korea as one of them. It gives Kim the idea that he should be allowed to invade. He gets the okay from Stalin. In fact, all of this is going to be approved by Stalin. And Kim is going to invade in 1950. I think this is the first proxy war because what you're seeing is it's a USSR invasion into North Korea, from in North Korea into South Korea. It's going to be sponsored and supported by the North Koreans, but it's not going to be done by the Soviet Union. So we're dealing with another one of the Stalins. Let's probe and see exactly what containment means to the United States. The United States, I think, politically smart, goes to the UN and says, let's get this to be approved as a peacekeeping mission. Super side note for you history nerds, the UN Security Council is composed of 5 countries, the United States, Great Britain, France, Soviet Union, and China. Now that's fun because which China is supported, which China is recognized in the United Nations? Is it going to be Taiwan China or is it China China? And at this point, we've made sure that Taiwan China is the Security Council member. The Soviet Union isn't there to vote because they're protesting that Taiwan is the China represented. And so this UN peacekeeping mission gets approved for nothing. The problem going into this, however, is what exactly are we willing to do to support a non-integral ally? Korea is not somebody that we've seen as an integral part of our post-World War II alliance. That's Japan. How far do you want to go to support somebody that isn't necessarily a strong ally? So we're in a bit of a pickle here in terms of, yes, we believe in containment, but do we want to risk World War III for it? The general that's going to be put in charge is going to be Douglas MacArthur, arguably far too aggressive for a mission that requires some tact and self-control. But what did you expect when you put an MPS kid in charge of a mission? Tact and self-control is probably not something that we would associate with that West Division grad. So anyways, here's what General Douglas MacArthur's invasion looks like. MacArthur is actually going to invade behind enemy lines. This is what I think this invasion probably looked like.